In the summer of 1997, the small town of Silverton, nestled deep within Colorado's San Juan Mountains, was animated with anticipation for the 4th of July celebrations. The old mining town, draped in banners and cradled by steep, forested slopes that had yielded silver and gold for over a century, seemed to come alive with visitors and locals alike. On a humid afternoon, with thunderstorms gathering behind Kendall Mountain, the Avery family packed their burgundy Suburban for a weekend hike, an annual tradition that had become more than a ritual. Sarah, age 16, and her younger brother Michael, age 14, were joking and trading barbs as they zipped up their rain jackets, their laughter echoing beneath the shadow of a clear, towering ridge. They would be joined by their father Tom, a mechanic familiar with the region's rugged terrain, and their mother Diane, a school secretary whose childhood memories were shaped in these very valleys. The mining legacy of the San Juans cast long shadows over every family gathering, every conversation in Blair Street's cafes, every decision about where to venture into the wilderness. Tom had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about the old tunnels and shafts that honeycombed the mountains, some sealed, some forgotten, all dangerous. The boom years between 1875 and 1900 had left behind a labyrinth of excavated earth, and even decades later, hikers occasionally stumbled upon rusted equipment or cave-ins that spoke of the region's industrial past. Sarah and Michael, like most teenagers in Silverton, had absorbed these tales with a mixture of fascination and recklessness that worried their parents constantly. Before we continue, take a moment to help our channel grow. Subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Your support keeps stories like these alive. The Avery family selected the relatively quiet Ice Lakes Trail for their hike, seeking solace in the wildflowers and quick creeks fed by melting patches of snow. The trail, known even then as one of Colorado's premier alpine destinations, began its steep ascent just below 10,000 feet and promised stunning views of the upper basin if the weather cooperated. The siblings, more adventurous than most, had lately found themselves drawn to rumors among their classmates. Stories about old mining tunnels hidden near the lakes, some supposedly leading toward forgotten shafts sealed up in the 1930s when the last of the major mining operations ceased. Tom was cautious. He warned his children about loose rocks and the dangers of straying from maintained paths, especially with afternoon thunderstorms threatening. The trail's 34 switchbacks and constant elevation gain left little room for error, and the rocky sections with steep drop-offs had claimed their share of casualties over the years. As they began their ascent past the old mine remnants visible to the left of the trail and Clear Creek waterfall on the right, the family moved in the comfortable rhythm of experienced hikers. Diane carried the first aid kit and extra water. Tom shouldered the bulk of their camping gear. Sarah had brought her camera, hoping to capture the famous wildflower displays that painted the meadows in brilliant purples and yellows during peak season. Michael, ever the explorer, kept scanning the tree line for signs of wildlife or anything unusual. The lower section of the trail passed through areas that would later burn in the ice fire of 2020. But in 1997, the forest was thick and green, providing shade as they climbed toward the junction with Clear Lake Road. The afternoon progressed with the steady rhythm of boots on rock and the occasional pause to catch their breath in the thin air. By the time they reached the lower basin, approximately 2 miles from the trailhead, the family had gained significant elevation and could see the dramatic sweep of peaks surrounding them. Storm clouds continued to build in the west, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the alpine landscape. Tom checked his watch, 3:30 p.m., and suggested they should consider turning back soon if they wanted to avoid hiking in the rain. but Sarah and Michael pleaded for more time, enchanted by the pristine beauty of the lakes and determined to reach the upper basin, where the most dramatic views awaited. It was here, at the creek crossing that typically left hikers with wet feet during high water periods, that the family's careful plans began to unravel. Michael slipped on the wet rocks, soaking his boots and socks completely. While Diane helped him change into dry socks, Sarah wandered ahead, drawn by what appeared to be an unusual rock formation near the tree line. Tom, focused on securing their backpacks and consulting his map, didn't immediately notice when both children moved beyond the immediate vicinity of the trail. The combination of Michael's mishap, the threatening weather, and the natural tendency of teenagers to push boundaries created a perfect storm of circumstances that would haunt the family for years to come. When Tom looked up from his map and called for the children, he heard Sarah's voice responding from somewhere above and to the east of their position. She and Michael had discovered what looked like an old mining structure, partially hidden by decades of vegetation growth, exactly the kind of historical remnant that peppered the San Juan Mountains. Despite Tom's calls to return immediately, the siblings were captivated by their find. Sarah later described it to her parents as like finding a secret door to the past, with rusted metal beams and what appeared to be the entrance to a tunnel or shaft. Michael, his earlier stumble forgotten, was determined to explore what might be the legendary echo tunnel their classmates had whispered about. The last clear communication from Sarah came at approximately 4:15 p.m., when she called down to her parents that they had found something really cool and would be back in just a few minutes. Tom, growing increasingly anxious about the weather and the children's safety, began climbing toward their voices, but the terrain above the established trail was treacherous, loose shale, hidden drop-offs, and vegetation that concealed the actual ground conditions. Diane remained at the creek crossing with their packs, serving as a communication relay between Tom and the children. The afternoon light was beginning to fade behind the storm clouds, and the first drops of rain began to fall just as Tom reached what he believed was Sarah's last known position. What Tom found instead was a scene that would be seared into his memory forever. Sarah's blue daypack, abandoned near the edge of what appeared to be a partially collapsed mine entrance, and no sign of either child. The opening, barely wide enough for a teenager to squeeze through, descended at a sharp angle into darkness that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. Tom called their names repeatedly, his voice echoing off the rock walls, but receiving no response. The rain began in earnest, and thunder rolled across the peaks, adding urgency to what was rapidly becoming a crisis. Tom's mechanical training kicked in. He noted the position relative to landmarks, photographed the scene with his disposable camera, and began the careful descent back to Diane to report what he'd found and initiate a search and rescue operation. The first search teams arrived within 2 hours of Tom's emergency call, but darkness and the continuing thunderstorm severely limited their effectiveness. Local volunteers who knew the terrain intimately joined deputies from San Juan County and experienced search and rescue personnel from Durango. The mine opening Tom had discovered became the focus of initial efforts, but attempts to explore the shaft were hampered by unstable conditions and the very real possibility of further collapse. The decision was made to wait for daylight and specialized equipment before attempting any underground exploration. Throughout that endless night, Tom and Diane maintained a vigil at the trailhead, coordinating with search teams and clinging to hope that Sarah and Michael had found shelter somewhere in the vast wilderness surrounding ice lakes. The storm continued until dawn, dumping nearly 2 inches of rain and washing away much of the physical evidence that might have indicated which direction the children had traveled. When the sun finally rose over the peaks, revealing a landscape transformed by the night's rainfall, the search effort expanded to include helicopter overflights and additional ground teams equipped with more sophisticated equipment. The discovery of Sarah's jacket fragment snagged on old barbed wire fencing added another piece to the puzzle, but also raised more questions. The fencing dated to the ranching operations that had preceded the area's designation as National Forest land, and its location suggested the children might have traveled much further from the mine opening than initially suspected. Search dogs brought in from the Front Range detected scent trails, but the previous night's rain had compromised their effectiveness. Each clue seemed to lead to more possibilities rather than narrowing the search area. By the end of the first week, the official search involved over 200 volunteers, professional rescue teams from across Colorado, and resources that strained the budgets of multiple agencies. The story attracted regional media attention, and the faces of Sarah and Michael Avery became familiar to television viewers throughout the Mountain West. Tom and Diane found themselves thrust into the unwelcome spotlight of public attention, fielding questions from reporters while trying to maintain hope and support the ongoing search efforts. The mining history of the San Juans became a focal point of speculation. Experts estimated that hundreds of abandoned shafts and tunnels existed within a 5-mile radius of the children's last known location. As summer turned to fall and the aspen leaves began their golden transformation, the intensive search gradually scaled back to periodic efforts focused on new theories or recently discovered evidence. Tom quit his job to dedicate himself full-time to finding his children, using his mechanical skills to maintain search equipment and his intimate knowledge of the area to guide teams into previously unexplored territory. Diane struggled to maintain normalcy in their home life while dealing with the emotional toll of not knowing what had happened to Sarah and Michael. The couple's marriage strained under the pressure, each dealing with grief and guilt in different ways. Winter brought an end to active searching, but it also brought time for reflection and more systematic analysis of the evidence. Tom spent countless hours in their living room, surrounded by topographic maps, photographs, and detailed records of every search effort. He corresponded with mining historians, studied geological surveys, and interviewed elderly residents who remembered the area during its active mining years. One conversation with a retired miner named Pete Kowalski proved particularly illuminating. Pete recalled a network of interconnected tunnels that had been excavated in the 1920s but abandoned due to unstable ground conditions. According to Pete, some of these tunnels had natural entrances that were nearly impossible to spot unless you knew exactly where to look. The children's disappearance became woven into the fabric of Silverton's community identity. Their photographs appeared in shop windows along Green Street, and every 4th of July celebration began with a moment of silence in their memory. Local high schools incorporated wilderness safety training into their curriculum, using the Avery case as a sobering example of how quickly adventure could turn to tragedy. Yet despite the community's support and the family's unwavering determination, the years passed without answers. Diane found solace in helping other families dealing with missing persons cases, eventually establishing a support network that connected relatives across Colorado and beyond. Her work brought her into contact with law enforcement agencies and search and rescue organizations throughout the state, gradually building her expertise in the complex world of missing persons investigations. Tom's obsession with finding his children never wavered, but it evolved from frantic searching to methodical investigation. He learned to read geological surveys, understand mining engineering principles, and interpret the subtle signs that marked abandoned workings throughout the San Juans. The passage of time brought changes to the Ice Lakes area that would prove crucial years later. Increased hiking traffic led to better trail maintenance and more detailed mapping of the surrounding terrain. The development of GPS technology made it possible to document locations with unprecedented precision, and digital photography allowed for detailed record-keeping that surpassed anything available in 1997. Environmental cleanup efforts targeting abandoned mine sites began to reveal the true extent of the underground network that honeycombed the mountains, providing new insights into areas that had never been systematically explored. By 2005, Tom and Diane had settled into a routine of annual pilgrimage to the Ice Lakes area, timed to coincide with the anniversary of their children's disappearance. These visits served multiple purposes. They maintained public awareness of the case, provided opportunities to search areas that had been previously inaccessible, and offered a form of communion with Sarah and Michael's memory. Tom had developed relationships with university geology departments and mining engineering programs, occasionally hosting student field trips that combined education with the ongoing search effort. It was during one of these educational visits that Tom first encountered Jonathan Rivera, a graduate student at Colorado School of Mines, who was conducting research on abandoned mining infrastructure in the San Juans. Rivera's work involved creating detailed digital maps of historical mining sites, using GPS technology and ground-penetrating radar to locate and document underground workings that might pose safety hazards to modern visitors. The precision of his equipment and the systematic nature of his approach impressed Tom, who had been struggling with the limitations of traditional mapping techniques. Rivera's research project, funded by a combination of academic grants and contracts with the Forest Service, aimed to create a comprehensive database of mining-related hazards throughout the San Juan National Forest. The work was painstaking and technically complex, requiring the integration of historical records, geological data, and sophisticated electronic surveying equipment. Many of the sites they documented had been lost to local knowledge for decades, their exact locations forgotten when the miners who created them passed away or moved on to other opportunities. The breakthrough that would finally answer the questions that had haunted the Avery family for nearly a decade began with a routine GPS measurement that didn't match the coordinates recorded in Rivera's database. On a crisp morning in September 2007, Rivera's team was documenting what appeared to be a collapsed mine entrance in the upper reaches of the Ice Lakes drainage, when their GPS unit registered coordinates that corresponded to a location from the original Avery search grid. The discrepancy was small, less than 50 meters, but significant enough to warrant investigation. What Rivera and his team discovered as they cleared away decades of vegetation growth and natural debris was not the simple collapsed entrance they had expected, but rather a complex system of interconnected workings that had been partially concealed by landslides and the gradual accumulation of forest litter. The opening they found matched descriptions from Pete Kowalski's interviews with Tom: narrow, angled downward, and nearly invisible unless approached from exactly the right angle. More importantly, scattered near the entrance were items that clearly didn't belong to the mining era: fragments of modern fabric, pieces of equipment that appeared to be from the 1990s, and most tellingly, a corroded but still recognizable necklace that bore an inscription reading, "To Sarah all my love, Mom." The discovery triggered an immediate response from law enforcement and search and rescue teams. The site was secured as a potential crime scene, though the evidence clearly pointed toward accidental death rather than foul play. Specialized teams trained in confined space rescue and recovery were brought in from Denver and Colorado Springs. The underground exploration that followed was methodical and heartbreaking, revealing a tragic story of two young people who had made a series of small decisions that led to an inescapable situation. The physical evidence recovered from the site painted a picture of Sarah and Michael's final hours that was both clearer and more devastating than their parents could have imagined. They had indeed found the entrance to an abandoned mine working, much like the countless others that dotted the San Juan landscape. The tunnel excavated decades earlier as part of an exploratory operation that never proved profitable, descended at a steep angle for approximately 200 feet before opening into a small chamber. From the positioning of items found at the site, investigators determined that both children had entered the tunnel, possibly seeking shelter from the afternoon thunderstorm that had complicated the original search efforts. The tragedy that befell Sarah and Michael appeared to have resulted from a combination of factors that individually might have been survivable, but together proved fatal. The mine tunnel, while structurally sound enough to remain open for decades, had been subject to seasonal water infiltration that created treacherous conditions near the entrance. Evidence suggested that one or both children had slipped on the wet rock, causing injuries that made it impossible for them to climb back out of the steep passage. Their attempts to signal for help had been muffled by the rock walls and the storm above, and their location deep within the mountain made any sound inaudible to the searchers calling their names on the surface. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the evidence that both children had survived the initial incident and had tried desperately to find an alternative way out of their underground prison. Items found scattered throughout the chamber indicated they had explored every possible route, attempting to follow air currents that might lead to another opening, and even trying to dig through areas where the rock seemed less solid. A water-damaged notebook contained what appeared to be messages to their parents, written in Sarah's careful handwriting, expressing love and regret for the decisions that had led to their predicament. The recovery operation took 3 days to complete, hampered by the difficult access and the need to document everything thoroughly for both the legal investigation and the family's peace of mind. Tom and Diane were present throughout the process, finally able to witness the end of a decade-long nightmare, but also forced to confront the reality of what their children had endured. The GPS technology that made the discovery possible had revealed not just the location of Sarah and Michael's final resting place, but also the full scope of the underground network that had claimed their lives, a network so extensive and complex that traditional search methods could never have found them. The conclusion of the search brought both closure and new questions for the Avery family and the broader community. The role of technology in solving the mystery highlighted how much had changed in the decade since 1997, when GPS units were rare and expensive tools available only to professionals. The systematic mapping approach that led to the discovery became a model for other missing persons investigations in mountainous terrain, demonstrating the value of combining historical research with modern surveying techniques. For Tom and Diane, the end of uncertainty allowed them to begin a different kind of healing process. The support network Diane had built around missing persons cases evolved into a broader advocacy organization focused on wilderness safety and search and rescue funding. Tom's expertise in abandoned mining hazards made him a valuable consultant for Forest Service safety programs and university research projects. Both found ways to honor Sarah and Michael's memory that went beyond the annual pilgrimage to ice lakes, creating positive change from the tragedy that had defined their lives for so many years. The story of the Avery siblings became part of the cautionary folklore that shaped how subsequent generations of young people approached the wilderness areas around Silverton. Their disappearance and eventual discovery illustrated both the beauty and the danger of the San Juan Mountains, where the legacy of 19th-century mining created hidden hazards that could trap the unwary. The GPS technology that finally revealed their fate also made possible new levels of safety planning and emergency response, potentially preventing future tragedies of the same type. In the years following the discovery, the specific site where Sarah and Michael were found became the focus of renewed safety efforts. The entrance was permanently sealed using techniques that would prevent access while allowing the site to serve as a memorial. A small plaque, visible only to those who knew exactly where to look, marked the location with a simple inscription: "In memory of Sarah and Michael Avery, who found their way into our hearts and never left." The Ice Lakes Trail continued to draw thousands of hikers annually, but the story of the two teenagers who disappeared in 1997 served as a constant reminder that adventure and tragedy could be separated by the smallest of margins. The technological breakthrough that solved the decade-old mystery also opened new possibilities for addressing similar cases throughout Colorado and beyond. The GPS mapping techniques developed by Rivera's team were applied to other missing persons investigations, leading to the resolution of several cold cases and the discovery of previously unknown hazards that posed risks to modern outdoor enthusiasts. The integration of historical mining records with modern surveying technology created a new field of study that combined archaeology, geology, and public safety in ways that honored both the industrial heritage of places like the San Juans and the contemporary need to protect visitors to these transformed landscapes. As the story of Sarah and Michael Avery's disappearance and discovery spread beyond the boundaries of San Juan County, it became emblematic of broader themes that resonated with families and communities throughout the American West. The tension between preservation and access, the hidden legacies of extractive industries, and the role of technology in both creating and solving problems all found expression in the narrative of two teenagers whose desire for adventure led them into a tragedy that could only be resolved through the patient application of scientific methods and community persistence. The GPS coordinates that finally revealed their location, 37-48-42N, 107-39-52W, became more than just a point on a map. They represented the intersection of past and present, technology and tradition, loss and discovery that defined not just the Avery family's journey, but the broader evolution of how society approaches the mysteries that surround us. In the high country of the San Juan Mountains, where the ghosts of miners and the dreams of hikers occupy the same spectacular landscape, Sarah and Michael's story continued to unfold in the lives they touched and the changes they inspired, long after their voices fell silent in the depths of the Colorado wilderness.